but this takes me a moment to go live. Okay, 2 more people entered. Let's admit them. Got it. And I will also now share my screen, and it is 7 o'clock, so we will get started, except for some reason my screen, my PowerPoint is not, okay, now I need to go back to this. Oh, weird. Something is wrong here because the shared screen is up. That is up. It should be showing. Okay, share screen again. Why can't I find it? Basic advanced, basic screen. Did that work? Are you seeing this?
Yes.
Yes.
You're seeing my slideshow, Foundations for a Thoughtful Judaism.
Yes.
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 Okay.
Yes.
Yes,
That's
we are.
very strange. Okay.
Yes.
What? Oh, no, don't do that. Slideshow from the beginning. There we go. Okay. So welcome, everybody. And we are going to begin our 5th of 6 classes. Tonight, we are delving into the term, the idea of practice, but we're looking into really the concept of mitzvah, choice and commandment. And I added something from my own background and experience into the curriculum here. So let's recite the bracha, Baruch Ata Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, ever-present, our God, sovereign of all time and space, who brings holiness to our lives through the mitzvah of living out words of Torah. We are now we have spent 2 weeks on peoplehood. We spent 2 weeks on faith, and we are now in the practice volume. So here is the overview of the practice volume. We're only just doing this one class from this volume. This volume explores questions that are fundamental to Jewish practice. What is the system of mitzvot, we'll talk about that word, trying to accomplish? Why the need for ritual action at all beyond belief? How have Jewish thinkers conceived of the meaning of mitzvot in an age of radical human autonomy? What are our obligations to others, to God, to the collective? How does sanctification of time, space, and body lead to holiness? So the first unit is belief and action. We're looking at understanding mitzvah tonight. The next unit would have been about whether ritual works if you don't mean it, or what if you mean it but you don't do it right. Then the very important question in class 3, which we're not doing, of obligation and autonomy, which we're gonna hit right on as a topic even before we begin. Then sustaining relationships, practices of connecting to others, to God, the collective, and what it means to have holiness in our lives through time, space, and the body. So that is the practice volume. There are 2 podcasts. One is the centrality of practice, and the other is practice as culture and practice as law. Those are 2 of the 3 that are available now. And you can look here now and see the 2, and I will send this to you later tonight. As a review, so far, in our first session, we looked at 2 different ways to understand Jewish identity. One inherent and one inherited. I like that. That's my phrasing. One inherent and one inherited. Automatic and family-based, the Judaism of being. I'm sorry, inherent and inherited is the same one, right? It's automatic and family-based, the Judaism of being. The other is aspirational and vision-based, earned and filled with content. That is the Judaism of becoming. That was our first week. Our second week, we looked at how one comes to faith. I think I skipped the second. No, that's right. This was the second week, also in peoplehood. 3 different ways of refracting the story: the importance of journey, of intellect, and of encounter. And that was our second week, I think. No, I may be skipping one. Did I miss a slide here? Sorry, I think I skipped the second session here. Last week, we addressed a very broad question. What does faith encompass? We began. Oh, I know what happened. I corrected this typo here, but not in this version. We began by recognizing the difference between faith as a relationship with God and faith as a belief in certain truth statements, knowing that these two may not be mutually exclusive. We then moved beyond the binary to the way in which faith involves meaning making in life, committing to a certain ethical system, or trusting in possibilities which are beyond our grasp. So at the end of last week, I gave you homework. And the homework was, is it better to do something because you were commanded to do so, or because you want to do it? So this is the first time when I will stop the share, turn to you. Any thoughts on this? This is one of the central themes. Is it better to do something because you're commanded to do it, or because you want to?
Well, having just sat through a condo meeting, if anybody's ever sat through those, it would be really nice if there were mitzvot attached to that, so people were doing it whether they meant it or not.
Interesting. So communal
For the greater good.
Communal standards for the greater good. That's important. And Nancy, I hope you had an okay weekend after our discussion.
Oh, I don't. Thank you for asking. I don't think I want to be an angel of mercy anymore. I think I'm going to go into business. But thank you for that.
We'll talk more about that later, or
Thanks.
or whatever you want.
Well, I'd like to respond to your question.
Sure.
Slightly different angle on it, though. I want to propose that, in a sense, there's no such thing as not doing something because you want to. In other words, whenever you do something, ultimately, it's because you wanted to, for whatever reason.
You know, the terminology for those who convert to Judaism is Jews by choice, right, as opposed to Jews by birth. But in fact, in this day and age, when you can disappear and sort of hide your Jewish identity easily, we are all Jews by choice. So I take David's point. Sharon.
Right. Choice. We always have a choice, but I think it's good to want to do something, you know, to have more feeling behind it.
Okay, so I want to introduce you to.
I think sometimes when you do something because you feel like you have to, and not that you didn't want to, as you're doing it, you discover that you're really glad that you did, and you are feeling rewarded by having done it. So it's kind of complicated, because there are oftentimes things that you don't want to do, and make up all excuses in your mind to not do it, whether it's participating in Judaism or going to the gym or whatever it is. And then once you do it, you have this feeling that, oh, I feel so much better that I did that. So I think that there's a little bit of both.
So I want to bring this to a head a little bit with the comparison between the concept of tzedakah in Jewish life. Tzedakah is usually and incorrectly translated as what?
Charity.
For those of you who are not aware of this, tzedakah does not actually mean charity.
Righteousness.
No.
Tzedakah comes from the Hebrew word tzedek. The word tzedek means just or justice, as in the Hebrew phrase tzedek tirdov, justice you shall pursue. Here's the thing about something called righteousness or justice, and that being the implication of tzedakah. That is, justice is something you're supposed to do, right? Everybody get that? It doesn't really matter how
I
you
missed you.
feel
I
about
missed you. No, I mean, okay. The question
Karen?
goes like this. Reason
Karen?
I don't understand.
Karen was, and I muted her because I think she was talking to somebody else. Tzedakah means justice or righteousness.
Right.
What is the origin of the term charity? Anybody know?
Caritas, from caritas.
Caritas, correct. From the Greek word, which is related to the word charisma. Somebody who's charismatic is basically sexy, right? What does caritas mean? It means love, right? When you see somebody in need, you are supposed to feel such love for that person that you respond to them. This is not the same thing. That is very nice. But what if you don't feel that way? The guy on the street still needs something to eat, right? That is a very different view. The Christian concept of charity based on love and the Jewish concept of righteousness and justice. The one word is translated as the other, but that's a problem. And in fact, tzedakah is a commandment, and caritas, if it's based on love, would be a choice. Now, you're supposed to live your life in such a way that you do feel that love, but I'm not sure you can be commanded to feel it. Despite the prayer, Ve'ahavta, you shall love the Lord your God. So let's go back to the shared screen now. What happened? I am having trouble with my shared screen here. Like, I'm not seeing all of my choices. There we go. It went right back to it. I don't know what that's about. Okay. So I want to introduce you to somebody that I have introduced to the curriculum here, not from the Hartman material. I want to introduce you to Barack Obama's rabbi. I misspelled Barack on here. I'll fix that later if I can. Arnold Jacob Wolf. Do any of you know this name?
No.
Okay. He was an extraordinary American reform rabbi, longtime champion of peace and progressive politics. While he was at HUC in Cincinnati, he served as a secretary to Abraham Joshua Heschel. Remember I said that Heschel was in Cincinnati for a couple of years before then going to New York? He then gravitated most of his career in Chicago. He founded Congregation Solel in Highland Park, where he remained until 1972. He then went to Yale. When he marched in Selma for civil rights, and in 1967, the FBI infiltrated the congregation and recorded one of his sermons. After leaving Solel, Rabbi Wolf spent 8 years as Hillel director at Yale, where he worked with William Sloane Coffin. And then he led KAM Isaiah Israel Temple in Kenwood, Chicago's oldest Jewish congregation, for 20 years, when what other famous resident lived across the street?
Barack Obama.
Barack Obama.
Oh.
By the way, you can see he celebrated his bar mitzvah at age 83, having never observed it at 13 because Reform Judaism didn't practice it at the time. And he said he was nervous about performing in public. He was the founder and leader of an organization for Middle East peace called Brei Ra, an organization which was ahead of its time in calling for a two-state solution and was essentially murdered by the organized American Jewish community at the time. This was the idea that was way before its time, as it were. However, I will point out before I get to my point in doing this, he was vocal in his support for Barack Obama, whose home is across the street. Obama did consider Rabbi Wolf his rabbi. You can see what he said upon hearing of his death. But years ago, in 1996, when Barack Obama was running for the state Senate, he said to him, "Mr. Obama, someday you'll be vice president of the United States." And Obama laughed and said, "Why vice president?" I remember a speech that he gave, which was in a book, and I could not find the book at the moment. I have it somewhere. But what he said was only something that is obnoxious will define us. Now, I have spent a long time thinking about that statement. And I think I have some understanding of where he is coming from, that who we are is kind of a definition, not just internally, but externally. And it isn't always who we really are, is partly who we want to be, but it isn't always exactly. So there's a lot we can talk about that. But he then went on to say, here is the obnoxious comment that defines Judaism. Mitzvah, commandment, he said, has a privileged position in Jewish life. It is better to do something because you are commanded than because you want to. Now, this goes against the grain of, remember, he's a Reform rabbi and a liberal progressive Reform rabbi, but he understands the tradition. And this goes against the grain of years of Reform Jewish teaching saying, just do whatever you want, which is a misunderstanding of Reform Judaism at its core, a core misunderstanding. And the Marilyn, can you email? Can you send a quick text to Katina to see if she forgot about tonight? Because last week she almost forgot, but we don't have to say it publicly if she did.
Yes, I will.
Thank you. I appreciate it. The question is, what is a religion? And the word religion itself is related to the idea of that which ties, that which binds. I don't think even Reform Judaism can exist without the concept of commandment, of obligation. And when all we do is emphasize freedom, 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 we're only doing half of it. Remember, the word autonomy has two parts to it, and we worship the first four letters. And I don't mean our car. What does auto mean?
Self-rule.
Auto means self, right? Which means that we have a freedom to look at the tradition and make decisions for ourselves about its impact in our lives. But once we decide that some part of this tradition speaks to us, what does nomi mean?
Law.
Nomi means law. It means obligation. It means commandment. Whether you think the voice of God comes from outside to you or from inside and bubbles up, or some combination of the two, or on Tuesdays you believe one and on Thursdays you believe the other, right? Wherever the idea of having to do something is essential to religious life. Remember that a thinker in Israel named Yeshayahu Leibovich said that when you comment on whether you liked a sermon, that's idolatry. When you comment on whether you like the music, that's idolatry. When you comment on whether a service was good or not, that's idolatry. Why? Idolatry is worshiping something other than God. And what is it that you're supposed to go to serve? Why do you go to services?
To be in touch with God.
Be in touch with. Well, God may or may not show up. Doesn't matter if God shows up. Why do you go to services?
Listen to the rabbi.
That's very nice of you, Nancy. I love you. I'll pay you later. But according to Leibovich, why do you go to services?
Personal.
Experience of thinking about everything with all of the other participants
All
and
right.
with the.
I don't mean why does Carol go. I don't mean why does Carol go to services. I mean, in Jewish tradition, why do you go to services according to Leibovich? Because you're commanded to.
Oh.
Because God tells you to. The moment you are commenting on the aesthetics, which everybody does, there's the high holiday seating chart, right? If you'd like to talk about the sports teams, sit here. If you'd like to talk about the rabbi, sit here. If you'd like to, right? Leibovich says you're commanded to do so. It's a mitzvah. It's an obligation. And the moment you introduce aesthetic criteria to evaluate the experience, Leibovich said, it's idolatry. Now, Leibovich was a very interesting figure because that's a stern Orthodox position. He was a hero of the left in Israel for strange reasons, because he said in September of 1967 that if you focus on the land, that's idolatry, because that's focusing on something other than God. And he warned against the danger of nationalism and of worshiping the nation. And therefore, he was, an early Orthodox critic of the settlements. But he did it from a religious point of view as being about idolatry. So it's the same logic as he applied to his other statements. But you don't have to go as far as Leibovich to still recognize that there is something about the concept of a commandment. To translate mitzvah as good deed is one of the great sins of the Reform movement. Good deed means, kind of nice thing you did. That's not what mitzvah means. Whether you think it comes from inside or it comes from outside, mitzvah means commandment. So that is my introduction to the topic for tonight. Now let's go to the videotape. Let's go to Hartman and their materials again, share, and let's move on. So Arnie Jacob Wolf was not in this material, but I introduced him into it. For this section, while religion is often portrayed as a body of ideas or testaments of faith, much of Jewish tradition places a central focus on practice. In this unit, we explore the emphasis on practice. What does Jewish practice encompass? Why should practice be important to religious tradition? What are the implications for faith if religion is oriented around practice? As opposed to, by the way, what?
Faith.
Belief, right? Dogmas, creed, right? What is the relationship between our feelings, intention, and sincerity and our external actions? What's the relationship between obligation and autonomy? So that's the whole unit. People often think of religion in terms of creed or belief. Judaism is very much oriented towards behavior, even as that behavior is not monolithic or uniform. The rituals, behaviors, and practices that people do may be tied to faith, ethics, and peoplehood. I told you my story last week, I think, of that I keep kosher because of a sense, to the extent that I do, because of a sense of connection to the Jewish people, right? But it can also stand independently. This first unit, what does it mean to orient Jewish life around behavior and action? Foundations for a Thoughtful Judaism does not offer a how-to approach to Jewish practice, but instead exposes the ideas embodied in the centrality of practice, as well as the scope, breadth, and depth of concepts and values which Jewish practice reflects. So this is tonight's class, Understanding Mitzvah, Choice, and Commandment. In this class, we explore the category of Jewish practice known as mitzvah, translated literally as commandment. Jewish tradition uses this very specific term for much of Jewish practice. Here, the concept of mitzvah, as well as an overall sense of the purpose of mitzvot, which is the plural for commandments, and what kind of life the practice of mitzvot might lead to. Underlying this, what does it mean to have a tradition which obligates us to do certain things? So what is a mitzvah? We've talked about that. But now, as I'll stop the screen in a minute, what parts of life does the system of mitzvot encompass? What do mitzvot accomplish? What's their relationship to faith and the goals of religion? So anybody want to tackle any of these before I stop the share? You can look at the questions again.
Yeah. You have a whole list of mitzvot: to rejoice with bride and groom, to visit the sick, to comfort the bereaved. Those are all mitzvot.
So that is a collection, a particular collection of commandments that comes from the Mishnah as elaborated in the Talmud, which
Your
says
obligations without measure. These are the obligations.
These are obligations without measure. And it goes on to say something which we dropped from the Reformed Prayer Book, who you taste in this world, but the reward for them is in the world to come. So that is a great collection. We could have used that from the prayer book as a text for tonight as well. Honoring one's parents, accompanying the celebrating with the wedding officiants, with the wedding officiants, I'm sorry, with the wedding celebrants, right? I like it when you celebrate with the wedding officiants. Sorry about that. And and bringing about peace. And then it goes on to say the Talmud Torah keneged kulam, but the study of Torah is equivalent to them all.
Because it leads to them.
Well, you've added the English. It doesn't say that in Hebrew, right? You've added that phrase from the Reform Prayer Book. I have to work with bar mitzvah kids in rehearsals to say that they should say that the study of Torah leads to them all, because most of them will say the study of Torah leads to the mall. And it's true that they may get gift certificates for their bar mitzvah. So for them, the study of Torah may lead to the mall. But that's not what that prayer says. Okay, so we now go back to the shared screen. There we go. And we now go on. What are your associations, positive or negative, with Jewish practice? Are you familiar with the term mitzvah, and what does it call to mind? And then we're going to do an exercise of some aspect of your daily, weekly, or yearly rituals, Jewish or not, that you find meaningful or compelling. So what are your associations, positive or negative, with Jewish practice? And what are the rituals in your lives, Jewish or not? Ellen.
Lighting candles on Shabbat.
Okay, lighting candles on Shabbat. Ellen? Unmute.
That's what I was going to say.
Okay.
For me,
Awesome.
the one, oh, sorry.
Because they're having a mezuzah or a mezuzot.
Okay.
For me,
Also, I would say saying Kaddish.
Okay.
for me, it's lighting the yard site candles for my parents. I think that plus I did put a mezuzah on the doorposts of my house. About 3 years ago, I did that for the first time. Those are the only two things I think that I ritualistically do with respect to
Okay.
Judaism.
Are there rituals in your life which are not? We're going to come back to candles in a moment. Carol Rich is our candle lighting specialist these days. We're going to come back to that. Are there rituals in your lives that aren't Jewish necessarily that like define the rhythm of your life?
Erev Thanksgiving.
Erev Thanksgiving. Okay. Your family must a particular way of doing things.
How about regular exercise?
Okay.
Yeah, that's
For
a good one.
people, that's the ritual, the daily, that's a good one, right?
I find the attending the Shabbat service and going through the process and then observing the yard site helps me connect with the entire ritual. And at the end of it, I always think of honoring the loss of my mother, which is what brought me back to the synagogue in the first place.
Thank you for sharing that. In synagogue life, there are regulars who come regularly and there are visitors who drop in. I can't tell you how many times I have heard from regulars the following. Marilyn, I think you said this not too long ago publicly. I didn't feel like coming tonight. I did it out of a sense of obligation. I forced myself to do it, and I'm really glad I did. From those who make this part of a routine or regular part of their lives, that's a powerful statement. I want to look for a moment. Go ahead, Marilyn.
No, I was just going to say that one of the things that makes me feel good is walking into our synagogue, because I have such a connection to the congregation, the building, the place, and I get that feeling.
Obviously, you were not going to say that it was my singing that makes you feel good.
I want to say that what you just said is what I was trying to express earlier when I was talking about the difference between what you ought to do and what you want to do, because often when you do what you ought to do, even if you think you didn't want to do it, once you do it, you realize you really did want to do it, and you're so happy that you did.
So it doesn't always work that way, of course, but in some sense, this is an aspect of discipline. Judaism by the way, there are two concepts in Judaism that we're not going into here, but that you should know about. One is keva, that which is fixed, and the other is kavanah, which means, spontaneous, or that which you intend. And in terms of prayer, the prayer service is supposed to be a mixture of something fixed and something spontaneous, or something that comes from you. So I think that there's great wisdom in the balance. I want to talk about Shabbat candles before we go on. Lighting candles on Friday night. What does that mean? This is a trick question. Ellen, unmute.
I don't know what my problem is tonight. Are you asking what does it mean for us, or what does it mean that in Judaism to light candles?
Yes.
They're both. It's a way of marking time and
Okay.
distinguishing, however one celebrates Shabbat, it's a way of distinguishing Shabbat from the rest of the week.
Okay.
For us, it's tradition. It's when we're home and can do it, it's something we enjoy doing.
Okay, so one is already intellectual, marking of time. The next is communal, in that it's an aspect of tradition. Go ahead, what else?
And providing a light to invite all to join and participate and be part of Shabbat.
So I think that the idea of spreading light is very powerful. I'm not sure how to categorize that in a second, other than with a word I'm going to use in a minute. Anyone else?
It marks an affirmation that you believe that God created the world.
Oh, okay. There's theological. I will tell you what it means to me. My mother. So to me, it's okay. So you have something that is the same act, and it's a commanded act, but listen to yourselves. We have an intellectual, a communal, a theological, a familial, meaning family, right? Ty, from me, and a symbolic one. Actually, the word symbolic applies to all. That is what a symbol is. A symbol is something with echoes, which with different reverberates, resonates with power, but not necessarily with the same meaning to everybody, or even to one person. It could be a different meaning on different occasions. It's not captured by one thing. By the way, I will be a little obnoxious here. And I know there are interfaith families who do have Christmas trees, so I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to the two Jews married to each other who have a Christmas tree because they think, oh, well, it's not religious. What's the problem with that statement? Kendra. Before you raised your hand, I was looking for you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What's the problem with that?
The problem is it is religious.
A Christmas tree, like
Yeah.
Shabbat candles, is a symbol.
Yes.
And a symbol is not something that you can control the meaning of. And so when you bring a Christmas tree into a Jewish home and you say, oh, that's just what's happening this time of year, you cannot control and contain the message that you intend for that action in that limited a way. Is everybody with me?
Mhm.
I don't mean to be picking on anybody who might do that. I just mean to say that that's how symbols work. Okay, back to the.
So it just doesn't justify saying it's a Hanukkah bush, which a lot of people do.
Yeah, which is just sort of insulting and ridiculous. That's like Christians who say that the three pieces of matzah on Passover represent the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Right.
I'm sorry, no, they don't.
Yeah.
Right, and it's not a Hanukkah bush.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on. We haven't even gotten to tonight's text. Tonight's class consists of 3 texts. The first offers the 10 Commandments as an introduction to and orientation to the diversity of mitzvot. We could have just as easily used that one from the prayer book, which Andrea quoted earlier. These are the obligations without measure. The second text discusses the relationship amongst practice, time, and body. And the third one describes the ways in which practice relates to ideology and to life. The 10 Commandments. What are they? What aren't they? What do you know about them? And what is odd about this picture?
What is it written in?
What is it written in?
Is that Aramaic?
Nope. Precisely and exactly the opposite.
Oh.
That is Paleo Hebrew.
Wow.
Wow.
That is the original Hebrew alphabet.
Oh my
At
God.
some time when Aramaic became more popular as a language, the Aramaic letters took over the Paleo Hebrew letters.
Wow.
And therefore, the Hebrew that you know and love is actually Aramaic letters.
Really?
In some places, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, you will find the new Hebrew letters, that is the Aramaic letters, but when it comes to the name of God, it's written in the old Paleo Hebrew. There was a transition time. This
Wow.
is what Hebrew looked like originally.
Wow.
The top of the, by the way, I don't know if I can do this, but the tablet on the far left,
It's our left.
Yeah, we can see your.
the third line. If you twist it a little, do you see what English letter that might resemble?
Which one?
L?
Which
L?
one?
Oh, no, yeah, I can see why you're saying that. I'll give you a hint.
See,
I'll give you a hint.
C, X,
X.
Right. Okay. There is a line in the prophet Ezekiel, in which the prophet Ezekiel says, "And the Taf shall mark them." Well, ladies and gentlemen, the original Taf is what you see right there. What English statement does this resemble?
X marks the spot.
Exactly correct.
Hmm.
That is a direct translation from the Hebrew,
Well, this
except
is
that
one
the
looks like
original form of the letter Taf was basically an X. And then you can see how it got moved on its side and then pulled down. And then you would even see that, so I think that that's of interest, but that's not what we're here for tonight. This passage is known as the 10 Commandments. It is, according to the Torah, it is the only thing that happened at Mount Sinai. The Torah does not claim that the entire Torah was revealed at Sinai. It only says the 10 Commandments were. Analyzing the 10 Commandments can tell us a great deal about Jewish life and practice. First, the content of Revelation is not primarily theological. There may be a little of that, but it's not clear if that's actually a commandment. We will come back to this point and some of the other points in the key ideas here shortly. Let's keep going. Who would like to read what is actually known in Hebrew as Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 sayings?
Hmm.
Who would like to read this in English?
Okay, I'll do it.
Okay, go ahead.
God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other God before me, no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image, nor any likeness of that which is in the heavens above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters under the earth. You shall neither bow down to them nor serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the parents upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, and showing mercy to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord in vain, for the Lord will not hold guiltless the one who takes God's name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you nor your son, daughter, male or female slave, cattle, or stranger who is within your gates. For in the 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, all that is in them, and God rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long on the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And it has disappeared. Okay, there we go. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male or female slave, nor his ox or his ass, nor anything that is your neighbor's.
Okay, I mean, there's hours we can talk about this. And of course, we can get caught up in the fact that verse 14 defines neighbor as male by identifying wife, right? A lot of other things. But what features do you notice about the 10 Commandments? Anyone?
There seems to be an awful lot about God being very jealous of being the only one that you recognize, and instructions about how you'll be punished if you don't respect that.
All right, there is some of that, and I would say that's true. And for a group of people for whom that was the defining feature that made them different than anybody else. What else?
It's saying what you should do rather than saying what you should do.
Is that all there is there?
No, but that's the general feeling.
Okay, so I would say that there are both positive, which means to do, like Shabbat, and honor your parents, and negative, like, you know, adultery and illegal Xeroxing, right? I think there are both there, positive and negative.
Well, I was just going to say, first of all, the first one, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first one that was an affirmative directive, the thou shalt keep the Sabbath day, and then thou shalt honor your parents. There were no, I felt this relief when I encountered those first affirmative ones. I hadn't noticed that. How many times have I come across the 10 Commandments in my life? But I felt uplifted to, in a sense, finally get an affirmative statement of, here's what I want you to do. All the other stuff was, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do that. And philosophically, you could say, well, I don't know. What's the big deal if I do those things? But it's difficult to argue with thou shalt honor your parents, thou shalt keep the Sabbath day. If you want to be a Jew, you keep the Sabbath day. I just had a different feeling in my chest when I came across those affirmatively languaged ones.
Okay, so a full code needs both positive and negative. Negative doesn't mean bad; it just means don't do so.
Yeah, good point.
There is a difference between apodictic and casuistic law. So, anybody want to translate that into English?
I always thought that apodictic was something that's capable of being proven.
You're close. I mean, apodictic is straightforward, do this or don't do that. So it could be positive or negative. Casuistic is what follows in chapter 21, for example. When a man kills a man, when you have a Hebrew slave, right? Casuistic is case law. So there are these different styles, and the 10 Commandments tends to be apodictic, whether, as I think it was Dave who pointed out, it's positive or negative. It's also, there are some that are... What, Carol?
are we to assume that the words were very carefully chosen because it says thou shalt not murder, not thou shalt not kill? And there seems to be
Right.
a huge
In other
difference.
words, I want you to go around and stop every safari on St. Thomas, pull over the driver and tell them that their translation of the 10 Commandments on the back of their safari is incorrect. In fact, there are major implications from the frequent Christian mistranslation of lo tirtzach as do not kill. It doesn't say do not kill. That would be lo teherog, right? It says do not murder. Big differences. One example, of course, be, if you want to be, if that's where you're coming from, be anti-abortion all you want. But you cannot hold up a sign that says abortion is murder in the United States, because you'll be wrong. It doesn't mean you'll be morally wrong. You could hold up a sign that said abortion should be murder, right? You could hold it up and say abortion is killing, but it doesn't say do not kill. It says do not murder, and murder is a term defined in this case by the state or by society as a whole. I don't want to get sidetracked on that, even though I'm sure we will, Texas. So the other thing is towards God, some of them, towards other human beings. And the other is, although there are God parts of this, which caught Carol up, this revelation is not primarily or overwhelmingly theological. Why these 10? What's the logic, including the more universal behaviors as well as those which are more idiosyncratic? For example, what do I mean by idiosyncratic? People will often, what's the cocktail party question from the 1970s? I'll tell you what the cocktail party question from the 1980s was. Oh, by cocktail party, I mean, a rabbi goes to a cocktail party. Oh, you're a rabbi, do you, right? In the 1980s, it was, oh, you're a rabbi, do you do mixed marriages? Right? I'm not quite so sure today the cocktail party question would be, oh, you're a rabbi, how can you support that barbaric country called Israel? Right? What was the cocktail party question or statement in the 1970s?
Vietnam?
No, that was the 60s. Oh, Rabbi, I'm not really religious or anything, but I'm a good person. I follow the
Spirit
and Commandments.
I follow the 10 Commandments. Now, as you just saw, that's impossible, right? You could say, I follow the 7 commandments of the children of Noah, which is in Jewish terms, maybe universal, something like universal moral law. But the 10 commandments are not meant for everybody. The 10 commandments were meant for Jews. Shabbat, right? The first couple of commandments, right? So the 10 commandments contain in them both universal and particularistic, meaning just for Jews. Can you envision a different foundational text?
Well, maybe that goes back to the 10 commitments that you introduced session 2 or session. That could be a different foundational text.
Okay, so it could be different practice or the like. We are now going to go from the Bible to the Babylonian Talmud. Now, we've had the Talmud before, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background. I'm giving a lot of introduction tonight. I hope I get through all what I'm supposed to. How many of you say aye or yes or something if you've never really seen a page of Talmud before?
Yes.
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 Okay, so that's 3 of you. So that means the rest of you have, which is
Yes.
great.
Yes.
Okay, fine. This is the first page of the Babylonian Talmud. I want to remind you that the Talmud has 2 parts to it. The Talmud has 2 parts. The first is the Mishnah, and you can see the size of the Mishnah. Now, I admit that that's small print, but the Mishnah fits into 1 volume. Do you see it?
Mm-hmm.
And then there are two Talmuds. The Mishnah was published in the year 200. In the land of Israel, there are discussions about the Mishnah. The Mishnah is in Hebrew. The discussions are in Aramaic. And in the land of Israel, in the city of Tiberias, even though it's called the Jerusalem Talmud, in the year 400, something is published called either the Palestinian Talmud, the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, or the Talmud of the land of Israel. All of those are the same thing. And that is a commentary on the Mishnah, which is called the Gemara, and the Mishnah and the Gemara together make up the Talmud. But in Babylonia, they kept talking about it for another 100 years. And so in the year 500, something comes out, which you see before you. Now look at the English translation of the Babylonian Talmud. That's how large that is in comparison to the Mishnah. You see it?
Yeah.
So the page of Talmud has in the center, it starts with the Mishnah. And the first Mishnah in the Talmud is this first section here. But then in the middle of the page, do you see this? Whoops, sorry. Very slightly larger letters in the middle.
Yeah.
Those slightly letters, Gimel Mem, that's the beginning of the Gemara, right? So the Gemara goes on for pages just talking about that opening section. On the far right of the page is the commentary of Rashi. Now, that is not standard Hebrew writing. That's condensed Hebrew writing. You know, in English, the thing called shorthand?
Yeah.
This was invented by the printer for the first printing press in order to get all of the Rashi in there. So it's called Rashi script, but guess what? Rashi couldn't read Rashi script. Rashi didn't invent Rashi script, right? So, but this is the Rashi's commentary. And then on the other side, the other column is the Tosafot, who are Rashi's grandsons and their commentary. But then you have marks on the side. Marks on the side, the Talmud gets distracted and it doesn't even always answer its own questions. So sometimes there are cross references to places in Jewish law, later Jewish law, where you get a clear answer to something. So that's what the stuff on the side is. So that's an introduction to the Talmud. I hope that was helpful to some of you. Here is the text. This comes from the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Makot. So who wants to read from the Talmud?
I'll do it.
Go ahead, Toby. Rabbi Simlai.
Rabbi Simlai expounded 613 commandments, mitzvot, were told to Moses, 365 negative don't do X commandments corresponding to the days of the solar calendar, and 214.
Stop. That's weird because, of course, our calendar is a lunar calendar with solar adjustments. So they had to have been aware of the solar calendar anyway. And then keep going. And 248.
And 248 positives do X. Commandments corresponding to the limbs of a person. Rav Hamnuna said, what scripture supports this? Moses commanded us the teaching, Torah, an inheritance from Deuteronomy 33. The word Torah or teaching in numerology is 611.
Stop. Numerology is the practice called gematria, where you assign to Hebrew letters a numeric value. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2. So Torah adds up to 611. What's the problem?
It's not 613.
That's correct. But they're going to say Moses taught 611, but we heard 2 directly. Keep going, Toby.
The first 2 commandments, I am the Lord your God, and you shall have no other gods before me, we heard directly from God rather than from Moses.
Now, time out for a second. Kendra, what's the problem with the last sentence, Kendra?
This adds up to 613, that sentence?
No. Yeah, no, the sentence, the first two commandments.
Yeah, well, they were supposed to be 10, right?
No, not in this case, I'm picking on you because
Oh,
you're
thank-
because you're Catholic. In Catholic counting, what's the first commandment?
I always heard that they were one. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me was number one.
Correct.
They're combined.
That's one,
Correct.
not two.
And then the second commandment is no molten images, right?
Right.
So
Right.
in Catholic counting, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. Now, this solves a problem. It solves a problem because the first commandment in Jewish terms is not a commandment. It's just a statement. So the Catholics solve a problem, but it creates a problem for Americans. And that is, why can't we just have the 10 commandments hanging up in a public courtroom or a classroom?
Because how you do it depends on what religion you are.
That's correct. That is, Jews, Protestants, and Catholics count the 10 differently. So even if you grant the idea that this is the foundation for Western civilization, which I would say it's one of the foundations, right? Even if you grant that idea, the moment you put up a particular text, you are choosing one religion over another, just on how you've divided them up, right? That's not my main point.
Also the issue of, you know, we're supposed to not have a recognized religion in this country, and there are other people who don't follow the 10 commandments, like maybe.
Yes,
Muslims.
which, you know, Roy Moore in Alabama would not even understand as an argument. But that's absolutely correct. That's the other reason why not to do it. But but even if you were going to admit that it would make sense to do it, which I don't, it doesn't. Once you do it, you're picking one religion over another. So it's not only establishment, but if it's establishment of a particular religion. But you know, 611 is in Torah, and 2 of them we heard directly from God. I mean, it's a strange statement for a lot of reasons, but I'm gonna sort of skip or move on for the moment here and go to the key ideas here. Rabbinic tradition begins to quantify the practices and sort of divide them up into categories. By the way, the idea that there are 613 commandments became firmly established before anybody came up with a full list. So you will find in Jewish tradition, different rabbis have different lists. All of them add up to 613, but there are different ones. The most famous enumeration of the mitzvot is by Rambam, Maimonides, who we'll come back to in a minute. So David earlier reacted negatively to negative commandments. What's the significance of having negative commandments as well as positive ones?
Protection.
Protection, what do you mean?
Protecting the people against doing something wrong. So you're telling them ahead of time so they won't commit a sin or commit something that's not true.
Well, that's fascinating. You know, there is a difference. There is a difference in the golden rule between Judaism and Christianity, right? Jesus said, "Do unto others
Others as you would have
Would
them
have
do.
do unto you.
That's not the Jewish version. What did Hillel say?
Do not.
Don't.
Don't
Do
do
not
others.
do unto others.
That would be hateful.
What's the difference?
There's,
Well, the negative provides a certain guardrail. It has a guardrail function.
I think that's exactly right. The Talmud has a great phrase. You should know this phrase. I use it in conversation sometimes. Mai nafka mina. You should use this in court sometimes, Carol. Mai nafka mina is an Aramaic phrase which means, what is the practical difference between these 2 positions? Right? So, mai nafka mina. What is the practical difference between do unto others what you would have them do unto you, and do not do unto others what you don't want them to do unto you?
Well, one's an affirmative obligation,
Uh-huh.
and the other is a non-action.
So I have no problem with affirmative obligations, except when it comes to, I posted something online recently about missionaries. I have no problem with affirmative obligations in general, except when it gets too in your face. Do unto others. I would want to know the truth. I would want to be loved. I would want to know about the good news. And therefore,
It's not about what you want. It's about what you shouldn't do to other people, regardless of whether it's what you would want done to you or not. It's just about things you shouldn't do. And it has no relationship to whether you would want somebody to do it to you or not.
I mean,
Okay.
the one has more to do with respect of other people, I think. You know, the negative, the Jewish commandment, I think, has more room for letting other people just, you know, be.
I want to tell you that we haven't come up with them during this class yet, but there are examples of things that I think Christianity or even Catholicism handles better than Judaism, right? In this particular case, I'm more comfortable with the Jewish view. I think that it is a guardrail. I think that it is a who you have to put yourself into the shoes of somebody to think what they are thinking instead of it being, you know, right? There is the boundary guardrail was, I think, the right word there. It's a little less active, which in this case I do think means a little less respectful. In 98% of the cases, there's probably little difference in practice, but I think conceptually there's an important one. What are some of the ways we classify the activities, rituals, and behaviors which characterize our own lives? Again, Jewish or not, anybody?
Having a schedule.
Having a schedule. Somebody earlier said physical. So physical act, what you do for physical activities, right? Having a schedule. You know,
different
I don't know how many of you are married, but God help some married couples if somebody moves the toothbrush. I mean, you get up in the morning, you stumble around, and things are where you want them to be, right? That's ritual behavior, right? Some of you have.
I categorize things by like the things I do for my husband, the things I do for my children, the things I do for my extended family, the things I do for my many pets, some of whom you've met, Michael.
Yes.
You know, and sometimes I remember the things I do for myself and the things I do for you know, my religion. That's the way I.
That's fabulous. The question, of course, is what do you do for Kendra, and is there enough space for that amongst everything?
Yeah. Well, yeah. We're working on that one.
Well, you know, father and father-in-law in the same field. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
Right.
Both psychiatrists.
That's right. So.
Both still alive, both still active. Amazing.
Yeah. What are some of the categories or distinctions we employ? You gave some examples. How do we balance and weigh our different commitments? We'll skip that for now. Okay, let's move on. Finally, we get to Rambam again, but in our third encounter, we now have a selection from the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed. This is his attempt to set out his rational understanding of religion. I have to say that he tells you at the outset that he is going to speak in code. And there are codes within codes within codes. And I think there are 17 and a half people in the world who actually understand the Guide for the Perplexed, which is more than the 14 people who understand Einstein's theory of relativity. It's an enormously complicated book. It is basically his attempt to reconceptualize Judaism through the lens of Neo-Aristotelianism. Here is the English translation. I tried to get a picture that reversed the order because I got volume 2 in front of volume 1, but of the Guide for the Perplexed. This is an enormously important work in Jewish life and thought. Here is the place where he starts out by talking about how all the anthropomorphic imagery of God in the Bible is just symbolic language meant to be educational. And here is the text from the Guide for the Perplexed. So who wants to tackle Rambam? Good, clear Hebrew in his Mishnah Torah, but in Guide for the Perplexed, it's often very confusing, but this is a good, clear section here. This is this is clearly, this is clear here. Anybody want to read it?
I can if you want.
Go ahead.
Every one of the 613 precepts serves to inculcate some truth, to remove some erroneous opinion, to establish proper relations in society, to diminish evil, to train in good manners, or to warn against bad habits. All this depends on three things: opinions, morals, and social conduct. We do not count words because precepts, whether positive or negative, if they relate to speech, belong to those precepts which regulate our social conduct, or to those which spread truth, or to those which teach morals. Thus, these three principles suffice for assigning a reason for every one of the divine commandments.
Now, he's a great rationalist, and he couldn't live, I guess, with the idea that there wasn't a specific purpose. There is a warning in part of Jewish tradition. We're not supposed to ask the reason for the commandments. Why wouldn't we ask the reason behind the commandments?
Because
what were they?
Questioning God.
Yeah, well, you're questioning God, and are you as smart as God? Are you even as smart as the tradition? Are you as smart as Rabbi Akiva? Maybe you are, but who knows, right? And so, you know, the classic example here is back then, they didn't know about trichinosis. And so the prohibition on pork must have been for
health reasons.
And therefore, now we know better past the bacon, right? The danger in asking the reason behind the commandments is that you think you will know better, and what if the situation changes? So from a traditional point of view, I understand. I do not, but I think that's incorrect, by the way, that the original reason for the kosher commandments was health. I do not think that that's correct. I think that it was a particular concept of holiness and of community. But therefore, I think that the health is a perfect example of using an excuse to do something to get around the commandment. However, Maimonides, as the ultimate rationalist, and perhaps the smartest Jew who ever lived, or maybe the second smartest after Einstein, was going to ask about the reasons. And so we now will get to, I'll take you through this fairly quickly and then we'll discuss it. We have seen that Jewish life places a central focus on action. What's the relationship between action and faith? Maimonides offers responses to this question in suggesting that the system has three goals. Each goal he enumerates represents a partial response of how the question of how action and faith relate to each other. First, he suggests that being involved in Jewish practice will shape one's beliefs. So instead of creed leading to deed, in Judaism, deed can lead to creed, right? That's a very important distinction between, I think, Judaism and Christianity. Based on this approach, mitzvot serve to buttress faith rather than detract from the centrality of faith. They're vehicles for shaping and maintaining faith. That's one. Number two, he explains the goal of many mitzvot is to create a well-ordered society. You talked about the guardrails or the do's and the don'ts earlier. Jewish faith served Jewish practice rather than the other way around. A life of faith should lead to a concrete good in the world. Thus, mitzvot are an end in and of themselves. One of the problems with that argument, of course, is the idea is how come so many religious people are really scoundrels? But that's for another time, right? If you're interested in that question, you should read Daniel Hartman's book, Putting God Second. It's a great book. Third, he describes the goal of some mitzvot is to inculcate good character. In this case, it is not faith, but goodness that is the goal. Once again, a life of faith should lead to goodness. Maimonides asserts that goodness is not cultivated merely through thought, but also through action. To attain or maintain all of these goals, good beliefs, good society, and good character, one needs concrete actions. As we mentioned in our introduction, many people think of faith when they think about religion. Thus, Judaism's move to make action primary and central might be surprising. The first of Maimonides' assertions is that one way to justify this stance, Jewish practice is meant to shape belief. Action conditions belief rather than the other way around. Where do beliefs shape behavior? Anybody? Any ideas? Any ideas? And where does behavior shape belief? I have a particular example in mind for behavior shaping belief. Anyone?
Kosher laws.
Okay, that's one. How does that shape belief?
Because your belief in what you eat shapes your behavior.
It does, in my case, as I shared with you last week, it does lead to an awareness. Because of between the brachot and what I can and can't eat for kosher reasons, I think about these things with every meal I eat. Think about that. That's really kind of powerful, right? That's a very deep, powerful spirituality.
When we first started studying Judaism, Peter and I, the first thing that we did was incorporate actions. We started celebrating Shabbat. We started keeping kosher-ish. I mean, not plates and things, but basically kosher. We were doing, and my experience as a Catholic coming into a sort of action-based practice was really very, very basic. I was reading the book and trying to, do all the stuff for Shabbat and everything, for Peter. And just the fact that I was really concentrating on that and doing it for some other reason than just I've got to get food on the table made it like really hard to yell at my kids while I was making dinner. It really kind of kept me so aware of doing specific things for bigger reasons that really changed. I just couldn't yell at my kids while I was making challah. It just didn't make any sense.
A focus on a tradition of holiness led to a state of holiness.
Basically, yeah. I mean, that was my first real experience of something that Judaism had to offer that, we don't really have a lot of in something like Catholicism.
Wow. So
that was my experience.
Yeah.
Actions.
So here's the one that I think of with this. People say you can't legislate morality. Oh, really? Look, there's obviously an awful lot of racism left in this country. But I would suggest to you that in many places in the South, people really don't give a lot of thought anymore to who sits in what part of the bus. Now, things are far from perfect, and maybe some people are thinking of it, but I got to tell you, making that illegal changed beliefs over time. Not all of them, not enough of them, but I think that, action can impact belief. Okay, Jewish practice is meant to shape society. How does this challenge the entrenched notion of religion being about what individuals do or what individuals believe? There should be a question mark there.
Could you ask that again, please?
It's right. It's written right here. I just don't have a question mark. Right. How does this challenge the entrenched notion of religion being about individuals?
Well, Judaism's never been about that.
No, it hasn't. And Reform Judaism has ruined that tradition at its worst, right?
I mean, the whole Torah is about how you structure society, courts of law, the whole 9 yards.
Tradition is about we, not me.
I think when you attend services on a regular basis and you recite certain things that we all recite for Shabbat or whatever, just the act of doing that causes you to think about those things and maybe translate those things into your behavior after you leave, because it's impossible to participate in that process and walk away from it without absorbing some of it. And so in that way, the behavior of participating in the services can help influence what you do when you leave and your beliefs about how you should treat other people.
It's supposed to, right? It's supposed to.
Well, Rabbi, is it possible that practice ultimately is designed to be extinguished? What I mean is if practice shapes belief, belief shapes society and so forth. If I'm engaged in practice that shapes my behavior for the better, at a certain point, will my behavior be so good that I can do it on my own and not need the practice to be my best? And to that extent, if that's so, to that extent, would the purpose of practice be to extinguish itself?
There is a debate in the Talmud about which Jewish holidays will still be observed in the world to come. So that incorporates some of your question, with the awareness that some behaviors that are part of Jewish tradition will, are merely instrumental, but some are so foundational that they are incorporated even into eternity. So you're not the first to ask that question, but you asked it fairly nicely. It's an especially interesting question in the US and separately interesting in Israel. What role should religion play in building society? To what degree should religion be separate from public life? And in what way should religious values and activities inform the character of society and the public square? Now, that's so fraught at the moment that maybe we'll circle back and talk about that in a few minutes. Jewish practice is meant to shape an individual's character. This approach suggests that it is what we do that conditions what we become. How much of our personalities are shaped by what we do? Anyone? Or is the way you have been changed as a result of repeated action over time? Kendra, I think that you gave a great example of that. I would say that the power of discipline and of habit is an important aspect of life. We've touched on some of these. In your own life, when do your actions condition your beliefs, and when do your beliefs shape your actions? Anyone? Okay, we're going to come to the conclusion soon, so let me stop the share. Any thoughts on any of this?
Yes.
Good, and you were even unmuted on time.
Yes, I would say one of the things for me is that Judaism places a role on both the individual and the community.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that there are certain expectations on how the individual behaves, but you're also part of a community. So that so that I can get, support isn't the right word, but I gain by being part of a community, but it's not as if I'm just totally lost. I'm not, it's not like I'm listening to, say, for me, a pope or somebody where I'm just totally part of that, or a chief rabbi.
I want to pause then and walk back. My critique of Reform Judaism was of what I considered to be an emphasis that was too much on the individual. What is the cost and the price of an emphasis that is not enough on the individual? And in what particular group of 51% of the population suffers from that? Marilyn?
What particular? I didn't.
What particular group that's 51.5% of the population suffers when a religious society emphasizes the group more than? Yeah, Kathy's got it. Go ahead, Kathy.
Women, females.
Right. The idea of one of the aspects of feminism is the personal is political and the political is personal, right? That was one of the early statements from right? But let's unpack that. That means that, just giving up everything about who you are as the individual for the group is too high a price to ask, whether it is about gender identity, gender fluidity. I'm not sure I understand all aspects of that, but the notion of surrendering for the group is something that women have paid a very high price in. And in the modern world, our appreciation of the individual leads to a sense of fulfillment, individuality, pleasure, something uplifting. So Ellen, that's a very important corrective, that we don't, we as progressive Jews, that is all non-Orthodox branches of Judaism and some modern Orthodox branches, introduce some balance with the individual and the group as well. My point is, the Reform Judaism never did stand for nobody is going to tell me what to do because I'm an individual, right? That is a misunderstanding of the free. Let me put it a different way. I believe that Reform Judaism gives us freedom within the context of our basic obligations, not about them. Okay? Reform Judaism never made Shabbat optional. I don't do Shabbat. I'm Reform. You're an idiot. Right? Let me rephrase that. And I am broadcasting this on Facebook, so maybe I should take that part down quickly. Right?
But however, you have the right to do Shabbat as you choose to do Shabbat.
That is what Reform Judaism stands for. How you observe Shabbat is a great freedom given to us within the context of modern Judaism. Whether you observe Shabbat shouldn't have been. There's no resolution of either the CCR or the URJ or its predecessor, the UAHC, no resolution anywhere that made Shabbat optional. That is the balance that we're looking at here. So Marilyn, precisely correct. Back to, let me see what's left from my shared screen here. Let us go to this empty slide, which means we're moving into the review. And we are going to summarize this. Mitzvot are defined as commandments and are referred to as a category of Jewish practice. There are many ways to understand the purpose. 3 possible ideas are: they help shape faith, they help create a well-ordered society, they require action to bring about good character traits. 3 texts, one is from the Bible tonight, one is from rabbinic literature, and the other is from medieval Jewish philosophy, open up important dimensions in Jewish practice. The 10 Commandments demonstrated that practice and behavior are core parts of the original divine covenant. The rabbis of the Talmud convey not only the quantity of mitzvot, but also characteristics and qualities that define them. Maimonides expounds upon 3 objectives, and this is my phrasing: intellectual, sociological, and psychological, each of which serves to explain the focus on practice we saw in the 10 Commandments and Tractate Makot. This is an introduction to the centrality, scope, and purpose of practice in Jewish life and tradition. The next session, which we don't do in this volume, analyzes the tension between external physical actions on the one hand and the internal mental, emotional intentions we bring or do not bring on the other. So that would be an interesting session, but we're not doing it. So I am now going to, I think that was the last slide. I will finally stop the share, and it is your turn in 2 minutes or 4 or 5 for your comments or thoughts or reflections on tonight or where we have come so far.
So I have a question.
Oh, okay. I'll go second.
Ellen.
So I have a question with that, and that's the tension that it seems to me that Reform Judaism has, trying to figure out what it is all about.
Yes, good.
And the balance with what, like, why belong, and it seems to me, why, like what, what parts of the tradition or the religion you consider crucial to the denomination?
Right, that's a great question. I am sure that Peter will be able to answer it.
Yeah, there is an answer. The answer is the place where men meet to seek the highest is holy ground.
What about women?
No, quoting it. It's quoted as men. That was what was carved over the stage, bima, at the Ethical Culture Society. That's
Interesting.
the answer.
And that's exactly why we need Reform Judaism, because we cannot only look at it as the actual text that only refers to men. And my interpretation of Reform Judaism is, let's open that up and modernize it and look at it as people instead of just men, and how we can all be a part of it in a more expansive way while still trying to honor the traditions.
So Carol, would you accept the place where people meet to seek the highest is holy ground? I mean, yeah, this is secular humanism.
So Carol is involved in Carol was involved in our historical theater here. What is it that makes, thanks, Nancy, I do want to hear from you about how it went, but we'll talk another time, I guess, Nancy. If you have to sign up soon.
I need to go, but
All right, well, best wishes, take care, and good luck, and we'll talk soon.
Saturday. Have a good one.
So we'll wind up soon, and these are big questions that we're circling around. Yeah, let me leave that and not try to answer it further.
For picking on
Ellen, your father had a penchant for waiting until 2 minutes before the end of a Torah study and then asking, like, what is the meaning and purpose of life? Define the universe and give 3 examples. So you are following in Ash's footsteps of blessed memory.
I listened well.
Yes, you certainly did. Other comments on
What
this?
did you want to say about historical theater, Rabbi?
Oh, yes, thank you. I lost my, the question is, in answer to Peter's question, even if you change it to people, which is the problem with carving words in stone, because you may want to change them later. All right. What are you going to do? Put a Post-it up on the statue that you're quoting, right? People, right? With the place where people meet to seek what is the difference between the Torah and Shakespeare?
Question.
Is it inherent? Is it just because how it has functioned? If it's instrumental and just because how it's become functioned, there was a great science fiction book a number of years ago by Walter Kaufman, A Canticle for Leibowitz, about a post-nuclear apocalypse in which a redefined Catholic Church made a holy text around the scrap of paper that came from before the nuclear apocalypse, which was, pick up 2 jars of pickles and whatever it was. It was like a shopping list. By a guy named Leibowitz. So that became a holy text. Is holiness, tonight's topic was practice, so we're certainly departing from it, but is holiness inherent or is it only ascribed? I leave you that, with other simple questions, like who's going to win Virginia tonight? Anybody get any texts about that yet?
No.
Okay.
I just wanted to comment on something that it's going to take us off a lot on a complete tangent, but it disturbed me from the very beginning tonight, and it's been lingering on with me about when we read the not the commandments, but the philosophy behind the 10 Commandments, whatever they call that. and it talked about slavery. You know, it said you shouldn't do this and do this with your spouse,
Male slaves.
your spouse, your slave, your cattle. I mean, we and our society have accepted the concept of slavery from, I mean, and I've always known this, but why is it affecting me? Have accepted that concept for so long as part of our being. And it took us all these thousands of years so that we eradicated slavery such a short time ago. How can we even consider ourselves anything if that's who we were? It just
there's a very interesting history of the Civil War and preaching before the Civil War, in which one New York Orthodox rabbi preached using the Bible to preach defending slavery, and one Baltimore Reformed rabbi used the Bible to preach against it. All I'll say as an apologetic answer is that the term slave in the Hebrew Bible, it didn't, as it appears in the Ten Commandments, really basically means indentured servant. You're right, Marilyn. It's a very large question, especially since the first thing we do when we get out of freedom, the first law in the Torah portion after this in Exodus chapter 21 is about a Hebrew slave. Does that mean a slave to the Hebrews or a slave? So it's a large, complicated question. So we're drifting away from the topic of practice, but tomorrow, next Tuesday, I mean, we go to the topic of ethics. And I think I've done something foolhardy, and that I've combined 2 weeks classes. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to pull that off in my preparation, and I will try to figure that out, but we will not go till 10 o'clock next week. We will go from 7 until 8 something. So thank you all for tonight. Karen, I know you will not be with us.
Rabbi.
Thank
Some
you.
people who weren't here, but I will send you the tape from tonight for the link to the video on YouTube, and I will send you the PDF. I will do that in a little bit. Ellen?
So you mentioned Virginia. I find it interesting that nobody today, when you talked about commandments and mitzvah, and what you do regularly, nobody mentioned government. Even though for most of us, that's a central part of our lives, even if it's just paying taxes or
that is
Voting.
voting, whatever, all those things, but nobody mentioned that.
Rules,
At all.
regulations, restrictions, boundaries, fiat, that is where we encounter sovereign power, is through government and our encounter with government. So that is right. So what is the balance between a tradition that talks about those things, but in fact lives in a society where it is not coercive, and you are living in a society that does have coercive power? So that's a very interesting question. And it's a more interesting question about Israel. What does it mean that Israel is a Jewish state? What does it mean? Is it merely using Jewish values? But which Jewish values? Does Jewish history, Carol, you've asked me about Israel before, does Jewish history play a role in determining policy? Where is the role of Jewish law versus British law versus Turkish law? This whole question about religion, society, state, power, powerlessness in Israel is every bit as interesting as that question of America, where we have a separation of church and state. So in theory, and not in Texas or Tennessee or many other places. It's a really interesting topic. Thank you all for some very thoughtful discussion. And next week, our last class is on ethics. I hope it's an ethical class. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.